Hello, everyone. You've tuned in to Just a Dude podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, bringing you stories and discussions that resonate with everyday folks like you and me. Today, we're diving in deep to the human experiences, especially in the wake of the chaos. So grab your coffee and let's get real. Joining me today is someone whose narrative is not just a story, but a mirror to many of our own journeys. His memoir, This Is Not Who We Are, captures the essence of searching for meaning and connection in tumultuous times. Please welcome David Maeda, a voice of authenticity in an often confusing world. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nathan. It's really nice to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. Could you give a little bit of background for our listeners to just let them know a little bit about yourself?
So for my career, which is part of the memoir, I spent 25 years as an election administrator, which is kind of an unusual profession to get into. I worked both at the city, the county, and then I finished my career as the director of elections for the Minnesota Secretary of State. That was from 2019 to 2024. So a very tumultuous time in elections with people calling into question the integrity of our elections. It was a very challenging time to be the director of elections. But overall, I'm very satisfied with my career. It led to many great relationships. It led to a very fulfilling career as part of our government. I mean, obviously, running a clean election is at the very foundation of government.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I look at that as well, you taking your job serious as an election official. In my past, I was a police officer, so it's the same thing, right? We're bound by different types of laws that we have to, essentially as an election director, you have to enforce, right? Because you have to make sure it's a fair election, the same as I did as a police officer. So I understand how much weight that can put on your shoulders as well.
Yep. I thank you for your public service.
Well, thank you too.
Anybody that gets into public service, I think we should applaud. I mean, at this point, there's a lot of, with what's going on with the federal government, a lot of questioning about the importance of government, but I think public service is something we should applaud people for.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And then, so David, are you still working as an election official, or have you retired?
I am not. I retired at the end of 2024.
Okay, excellent. And then, so that led you to write a book, right?
Well, actually, it took me 12 years to write my memoir, and it was not because I'm a slow writer, it was because I wasn't organized, basically. I wasn't exactly sure what the central theme of the memoir it would be. It started out to being about my career as an election official, but then it really, that's only a small part of my story. I covered different aspects of my life. I think the underlying theme of the book really is I've struggled almost my entire life with severe depression. And so trying to deal with the depression and be a functioning adult and being able to have a successful career, that's kind of the nature of my book.
Yeah. And then you also cover the context of 2020, right? When we go through COVID and how that changed.
Right. Correct. I mean, I think one of the things that really is at the root of my depression is I have a hard time processing things and finding the meaning behind things. And so when 2020 occurred, it was really overwhelming. And I'm still trying to figure out what it meant, not only for myself, but for our society. I mean, I go out and it just seems like people forgot that the whole pandemic happened, and I'm not able to do that. And so I do write a lot about that in the memoir.
Excellent. And then I guess another theme is seeking meaning and authentic connections post 2020 as well, right?
Correct. I think one of the reasons, I mean, I'm pretty open in the memoir. I share parts of myself that I don't think most people feel comfortable talking about. But I think one of the underlying themes of the memoir is the importance of being authentic.
Yes.
It's something I learned over the years. I have a very sarcastic sense of humor, and I think I use sarcasm a lot to cover up who I am. But as I've gotten older, I really have tried hard to be my authentic self in situations and to share my story that hopefully others can relate to. I mean, being human, I think, is being authentic, and we don't always get there. I mean, it's very hard to be an authentic person, and I struggle with it, but it's something that in writing the memoir, it really became one of the themes of what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, excellent, David. And it's funny because, and I don't want to say funny like haha, but it's different because we spend a lot of our younger years trying to develop who we are. And then as we get older in life, I notice as I'm getting older myself, that I'm trying more to be like, I know who I am now or have an okay idea. But you're right. Trying to bring that authentic personality out and that authentic thoughts and beliefs is really something that it's hard to do, even as an older individual. Then I can't even imagine what it would be like being younger, especially nowadays.
That's a great observation. Like you, when I was younger, I didn't know who I was really. It's trying to figure it out. And then you get into your 20s and 30s and you start figuring out, well, this is who I really am. And then I'm now 6 years old, I think. Not that I figured everything out, but I figured out enough that I think it's easier for me to be authentic in most situations.
Yeah, excellent. And so for you, you wrote your memoir because you've had a long journey as an elections official, overseeing elections, which is a huge job because I can't even imagine the weight that's on your soul, especially during the election. Nobody looks at all the work you're doing prior to election, but then you go to an election and all eyes are focused on you, especially the 2020 election. I can't imagine what that was like.
Right. The analogy I like to use is being an election administrator is like, not that I've ever been married, but it's like doing a wedding. Everything's geared for that one day, but you have all these little pieces that have to occur beforehand to make sure that one day runs smoothly. To your point about the 2020 election, when I got into elections, it was the things I worried about were the poll workers showing up on time or running out of ballots or somebody getting really angry at a polling place. 2020 was off the charts. We had to figure out on the fly, like other industries, how to run a safe election during a global pandemic.
Right.
And I don't have any public health background.
Exactly.
It was kind of fly by my pants type of thing. And we learned as we went along. We worked closely with our Minnesota Department of Health experts on different stages of the pandemic, but it was really a very difficult election. In Minnesota, we actually had a record turnout. We almost had 80% voter participation.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
Led the nation, and I'm very proud of that.
But that also, again, brought more work to you, right? With an 80% voter turnout, you and your teams. Yeah, I can't even imagine. And then not only that, but did Minnesota have in-person voting in 2020?
We did. Traditionally, we are an in-person voting state. We do have early voting, both in-person early voting and then vote by mail. A lot of people, obviously, in 2020 took advantage of being able to vote by mail.
Yes. Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, did you see a huge uptake? Because I think every day, I'm in Ohio, David, so I know even us, we have the same thing. We can vote in person. We can vote in person early. We can, get a mail-in ballot. But yeah, I think even here in Ohio, we saw huge mail-in voter turnout.
It doubled in Minnesota. Typically, we have about 20% of our voters vote by mail. In 2020, it was closer to 40%.
Yeah, that's a huge jump. Think about that. You're not only worrying about your in-person elections, but now you've got this jump in mail-in ballots, which might even brought more people out to vote than normally would in a normal election, what I call normal without a pandemic going on.
And what I think people don't realize is that the process of mail balloting is much more complicated than in-person voting. In Minnesota, the person has to apply for the ballot so that we have to get an application for them. We check that in the voter registration system to see if they're registered or not registered, and then send them the appropriate materials. But then we also create a unique barcode for that particular ballot, so we know that the voter is the one that voted the ballot. Mm-hmm. We have on our website we give the voter the ability to track their ballot so they can see the status that we mailed them the ballot, that we received the ballot back, that the ballot's been counted. But all those takes extra steps.
Yeah.
So mail balloting there were questions about the integrity. I would argue that it's at least as secure as in-person voting because we have all these things in place to make sure that the voter has to apply for the ballot, that the voter is the one voting the ballot, and then that only the ballots that have followed the process get counted.
Yeah, that's a lot of checks and balances in there, which is a good thing, for our voters. We want to feel that our elections are secure, and it's great that you do that. And I know Ohio does something similar to that as well. You have to apply for the absentee ballot, and then they send it to you and stuff. But I have to say that's probably not the same everywhere in the country, though, right?
Well, every state has unique election laws, but I would say that every state has laws in place to make sure that mail balloting is secure.
Gotcha. Excellent. So with 2020 and post 2020 and dealing with your depression, how has your personal journey kind of mirrored the broader societal issues that we've been seeing?
That's a great question. As far as I think when society reopened, I had a hard time rejoining. I admit, I'm very much a person that I live by myself. I'm very independent. But it was hard for me to, like, I have season tickets to Minnesota Twins baseball games and season tickets to Minnesota Timberwolves basketball games. And so it was very hard for me to get back into the swing of things and go out among thousands of people. But I enjoy sports so much that was kind of my incentive to get back involved in society.
You kind of had to push yourself a little bit above your comfort zone to get back into things you enjoyed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I can imagine that, a lot of us were all home during the pandemic. And I don't know if you were the same or not, but, a lot of us got sent home. Things were closed down. We weren't around people other than if we were lucky enough to have people in our immediate families, right? We had those folks. Right. For the most part, nobody, and I could see how with someone with depression, and I've dealt with depression myself, how being alone and isolated from everyone else can definitely be detrimental to your mental health.
It's an exaggeration, but it was like solitary confinement. I do myself, and I didn't see people. I saw people on my computer, but there's no
exactly like we are right now. This is about how close it got.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so this was the reality of your relationship during that pandemic is just through a screen, and that's that's got to be extremely tough, even if you don't deal with depression. I mean, just think about how many normal, I put that in quotes, how many normal folks, probably dealt with the same thing. I know I did. It was, if it wasn't for my wife, I probably, would have had a much harder time myself. So I could totally understand how, living on your own and just seeing people on the screen could definitely affect, how you process life and everything.
I'll be quite honest, my depression, it got exponentially worse in 2020. It was just really hard to deal with.
Yeah, I don't want to say rightfully so, but understandably so. I think anybody would say, well, yeah, I can see how that would happen,
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I'm very proud that I actually published a memoir, because it was a lifelong dream of mine to be a writer and to actually have a tangible book to hold up and show people. I should have brought my book with me, but that really helped me get through all that depression from 2020.
Through the writing?
The writing and then eventually publishing it.
Yeah. So, and you took 12 years to write this, right? So it started off as just about a memoir about, your journey as an elections official, but it kind of grew a little bit more from there, didn't it?
Yep. It's actually about 6 sections. So the first section's about my career in elections. The second section is about my struggle with depression. The third section is my lifelong love of cats and all the cats in my life. The fourth section is about an intimate relationship with somebody that was very important to me. The fifth section is my childhood, and then the sixth is life since 2020.
Yeah. So that covers that's a big spectrum of life that you're really opening yourself up about and sharing with, essentially the world, because anybody can purchase your book. And I think that's great because, one of the things that I do, David, with Just a Dude podcast, especially with my guests, is I try to take what I call normal, everyday people and share your extraordinary stories. And I think you're no exception to that rule, because not only do you have an extraordinary story of what it's like to be an election official over a career, but you also have a story that you're making yourself vulnerable and showing other people that, hey, guess what? You're not alone in this.
Yeah, when I was writing the memoir, there were parts of me that thought, do I really want to share this part of myself with the world? I'm really being vulnerable here.
Absolutely.
But I think the writing that's always touched me the most is when somebody is vulnerable. And I think, especially in the memoir genre, I think I don't want to puff my chest and say, this is everything I've accomplished. I want to show that it was a difficult struggle all the way along, and show the parts of me that really struggled to be who I am.
Absolutely. And it's like that with anything in life, that, there are struggles in almost everything that we do or we want to do. And it's about overcoming those struggles and, finding out who we are and what we can do. And stories like yours help to inspire those of us that maybe do feel down to say, hey, look, David was able to do this. He was a top election official in Minnesota. He had these struggles just like I do, but he's able to overcome them, and he's got some ideas for how we can, work together and overcome these things as well. So
yeah, I really hope that's the message anybody that reads the book takes away from it, that we all have struggles. So hopefully you can relate to something I wrote, and it, I don't know, reinforces it. It makes you realize that you're not alone in this world, that we all do have struggles.
Absolutely. And David, can you, obviously during your struggles, you had some search for purpose. Can you share a story or some stories with the listeners about your search, for purpose during your struggles? Without giving too much away.
One of the things I discovered in writing the memoir, I write a lot about failed relationships, especially failed romantic relationships. I mean, I won't say several, I've had a few throughout my life, but what I really realized was in each one of those relationships, I think I was looking for somebody to save me from my depression, and that's really not fair to put on another person. I wish I had had that insight as a relationship was going on, but it's been very helpful in having successful relationships now, in realizing that we're not around to change another person. We're not around to save another person. We are around to enjoy who that person authentically is.
I love that, David. That's such a great thing. I don't think we often think about. And I think as males, and I don't want to speak for every males, but I know a lot of males that I deal with, we have a tendency to be a little, my goodness, how do I say it? Self-involved, maybe. I don't want to say not self-involved, but selfish, right? We think that, how can I get a benefit from this? Or, maybe like you said, I was looking for someone to save me from my depression, but that wasn't fair. And I think that's a great point that you brought out, that we can't always put our problems on other people. While they can help us, definitely they can help us through our depression. It really does come down to us and getting the help that we need and working ourselves through that, right? I mean, obviously it's going to help to have someone to go through it with, but I think just what you said was absolutely right, that we can't put that on another person to help, make us better.
Right. And that was something I didn't intend to write about, but it was something I learned as I was writing, which is, it's interesting that you can learn from writing a memoir.
Yeah, absolutely. About yourself, right?
Yes.
You really get a good introspection to yourself.
Yes.
Because you're writing it down on paper and now you're looking back and saying, oh, wow, look at that. Or, oh, wow. And then you see these little themes come up as well that actually probably helped you in the long run, right?
Yes. Another theme I should mention that I didn't intend to write about, but it came out in many parts of the memoir, is I'm Japanese American. So growing up Asian American in a very white community, I didn't really realize how difficult that was until, again, writing the memoir. I would recall a memory of something that occurred. Nothing racist, just something that made me feel completely different from the people I'm around. And I didn't realize the weight of being a different race amongst other people, how much that played a part in who I became.
Yeah. Did you ever have any adversities just because of your race, David? Did you notice?
I've had a few, blatantly racist activities go on against me, especially when I was growing up as a little kid. I mean, we all are mean to each other in grade school and junior high.
Yeah, of course.
It's very easy to be mean to people, but often people would gravitate to something racial in bullying me. But in general, I think it isn't explicit. It's more implicit that the role of race has played in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it's, obviously I haven't had the same, issues with race that you have, most likely. But maybe as a cop, because that might be more of a prejudice, not a racist, but, I definitely felt prejudice just because of some ideas, and you might have even felt that prejudice too as an election official, right? People might have said, oh, David's not doing his job. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yes, especially is actually that type of criticism obviously increased since 2020. We were operating in an atmosphere where people were not only questioning the integrity of election, which has happened throughout my career, voter fraud, whatever. But since 2020, it kind of changed into questioning the integrity of the election. People running the elections, that was new and a very difficult thing to deal with.
Yeah, it was, because if you think about it really kind of prior to 2020, it was, the process, not necessarily the people running it, but, is the process safe? And then they went, just as we seem to do in today's society, let's attack everybody. Here's someone who's dedicated his entire adult life to making sure that the elections are fair, legal, and balanced, and to make sure that people have the access that they need to. But yet now in 2020, because we see different numbers than we have, now everybody's attacking you guys. And I don't think that's fair, because I really do think that for the most part, those of us that get into public service, it is for the reason that we want to help other people.
Absolutely. I never thought I'd be in a job where somebody would accuse me of treason.
Yeah.
But that happened after 2020. I mean, it was just nuts.
Yeah, I can't believe that any citizen in the United States would willingly become treasonous or go against the laws that we have, especially with an election, regardless of what our political affiliations are. And I was the same way as a police officer. It doesn't matter to me. I'm doing a job. I'm making sure that it's fair across the board. And I want to make sure that, that we influence everything the way that it's legally allowed to be done. And, I think people always try to put that you have personal feelings in there and that you can't separate your personal from the job that you have to do, but you definitely can.
My job, I don't have to agree with the laws I'm enforcing, but I do have to enforce the laws that are in place.
And that was the same way it was with me as a cop. I mean, we've got so many similarities, right? I can't tell you how many stupid laws out there that I had to enforce that I was just like telling people, hey, I'm sorry I got to write you a ticket for this, or I'm sorry I got arrested for this, but the law is the law and I've got a job to do. And you know what happens if I don't do the job? I lose my job. Same thing with you, right, David? I mean, if you didn't enforce the laws and the rules that were put by the state, that, and the Constitution at that, right? Because you're following constitutional law as well for the elections, then you would definitely be out of a job, I would think.
I not only would be out of a job, I'd be committing a crime.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd probably be talking to me from a jail cell right now if you did, right?
Absolutely.
So, but I want to get back to the theme of the book. I know we're talking about elections, but I want to talk about you a little bit, David, as well. How did because obviously you started writing your memoir prior to the pandemic, but how did the pandemic influence your, how you really kind of looked at yourself and what was going on in your introspection to yourself?
I really think the section about depression really grew out of the pandemic. I wasn't planning on writing about my depression. I think reflecting on my life, I was hospitalized for depression right out of college, which was a horrible experience. I tried traditional talk therapy and medication. I've done more experimental things like ketamine treatment, hypnotherapy, acupuncture. I've tried a lot of different things. I think the pandemic really made me reflect on what is at the root cause of your depression? Why have you been depressed your entire life? And it actually was pre-pandemic, but I was seeing a therapist that diagnosed me with existential angst. And for the first time, it seemed like an accurate diagnosis. I'm always looking for the deeper meaning of things. And when I don't find a deeper meaning, then I get depressed. And that's been a pattern throughout my life. But I mean, it really became clear during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's tough to find a deeper meaning, especially if you're always searching for it, because that could be definitely hard to find if it's not there, right? If there truly isn't a deeper meaning. But I'm kind of like you, David. I always want to know the why and the how behind things, and what's the meaning behind this? What is it going to do? What's the purpose? My mind's just always going. I can't just take it that, that something is something. I'm always like, there's got to be more to it,
That's actually something I wrote in the memoirs. I'm always, for me, the big question is why.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. I've always been a why person, and I think it drives people crazy. But I'm always, your boss comes up to you and says, hey, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And I can't quite see like what the meaning behind it is. And so naturally, what's the first question? Well, why are we doing this? Why are we changing it from current to, what is your expected outcome? And, I'm trying to always figure out why I'm doing something so that I can address it the best way that I can.
Well, I'm glad we share this in common, because one of the things that makes it even worse is, why don't other people need to know the why?
Exactly.
How can they function without knowing the why?
Exactly. I feel the same way, because I'm like, some people, you just tell them something, and they're just, okay. And they just go with it. And I'm like, wait a second, that was way too easy. But yeah. And then you talked about, so in your book, so you and I obviously were the same with, as far as the need to know why and finding deeper meaning in things. And I could definitely see how that can lead you down a rabbit hole of negative thoughts, for sure. Especially if that's not getting addressed, and then your mind goes to play. Because if your mind's like mine, it'll just make up all kinds of stuff that you're just like, where did that come from? So David, how did you talked about this a little bit, but your romantic connections, how did you navigate your relationships during these turbulent times?
Well, I mentioned one of the sections of the book is an intimate relationship I had during the pandemic, and since then, and she and I found a very unique way to create a very safe space where we could share everything going on in our lives without the other person judging, which I think is very rare.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that was life-saving during the pandemic. I mean, just having somebody I could talk to deeply about what was going on, even if it's through a computer.
Yeah.
Just having a safe space where I could share everything about myself, that was very unique. And the first time I've ever really had that in my life.
Yeah, and that is amazing. Even for someone like myself, I've been married this year. I'll be married 20 years to my wife, which I'm just thankful for. But that is one of the biggest things I tell everybody. If you're in a relationship or you're married, don't jump to conclusions, right? Listen to folks, hear it out. They don't, sometimes we just need to talk to get things off our chest. We're not trying to solve a problem too. And I think that's great when you can have someone or, you can relate to, and it doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship, but just sit there and listen, and then if somebody solicits feedback, by all means, give it. But sometimes we just need to be listeners for folks too, and hear what's going on without judgment. Because let me tell you, if my wife judged me, she probably would have been gone a long time. So, but yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because it's to have a safe space for yourself, especially if you're romantically involved, to have good, deep discussions. It can do nothing but build the relationship.
And she and I are very different people. I mean, we're different politically. I mean, she's completely opposite of me politically. And so it was very unique to be able to find somebody that was that different than me, that we somehow found this connection where we really could create the safe space and talk to each other authentically.
And one of the messages I try to get across to my listeners, David, a lot is that even though, because I do cover politics on my weekly news episode, but I always have this open mind that regardless of what your political views are, and, politically, I think in this country we've gone, you're either with me or you're against me. And the reality is we have so much more in common than just our political differences. And we need to work past those to find that common ground, to really bring ourselves back together as a nation.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I would just add, we have to get past the point where if you and I differ politically, you're the enemy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to go. I grew up as a kid, knowing that and being taught in school that, yes, there's different political parties. It wasn't as divided as it is now, for sure. I mean, there was always left versus right, but they always seemed to find some common ground somewhere to get things done. But you're absolutely right. You're my enemy if you're on the other side of the aisle, that needs to stop. We've got plenty of enemies against the U.S. We don't need to be enemies ourselves, right?
Exactly.
But no, I'm glad to hear you say that too, because I love hearing other people share the same ideas, which lets me know that maybe my thinking isn't on my own, that there's a lot more people out there like us that are saying we need to get past these differences and come back together.
And like you said, we have much more.
So much more. I mean, look, we live in one of the freest countries in the world. We have the freedom to really do pretty much what we want. We don't have the threat of war on our doorstep every day like some other countries do. I mean, let's get past this little petty stuff. Let's find a way to work together so that we can just be a united country again. Okay, sorry, I went off on my tangent there, but no, I just love, because I see so much negativity nowadays, and I just want to say, let's be more positive. Let's look for the positive stuff instead of the negative stuff.
Yep, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
David, I'm going to get into a deeper topic because I want to talk. I think depression is something that is not talked about enough. And I think it affects a lot of people, whether they know it or not. And I just want to know, from your perspective, how has your journey with mental health, the lows that you experienced, and how did you find your way back from that?
Well, I should start. I think there is a stigma against mental health issues. I think people
Absolutely.
are reluctant to talk about it. But once I decided to share my experience with depression in my memoir, again, I wanted to be completely honest about how difficult it's been. There have been periods of my life when the depression lessened, where I was much higher functioning. I think large part of my career falls into that category. But I think for me, it's really, I mentioned I went through traditional treatment of talk therapy. I still see a therapist in medication. which has had limited effectiveness for me. I mean, my therapy sessions, I shouldn't discount them.
Yeah, it's good to talk to somebody still.
Yep. And I found several really good therapists I've worked with over the years. I think for me personally, being a very introverted person and being a person that's always relied on writing to figure out my thoughts and feelings, writing has really played a huge part of being able to battle depression, because just being able to put down on paper, today was a rough day, helps me just to get it out and have it on paper. And so for me, writing and introspection has really played a huge part in battling depression. I did some group therapy over the summer, and one of the things I'm proud of is that I mentioned how important journaling was to me. I journal every night, and I got 2 other people in the group to start journaling, and to me that was a huge accomplishment. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's something that people have told me to do for quite a long time. And I have the books to journal. I just haven't actually done it yet. But you're right. Writing down things too, it also gives you different perspectives, right? Because once you write it down and see it, and you start thinking maybe, okay, maybe did I overreact here? Or maybe, yeah, this was something that was detrimental. And but that was the question I was going to ask you, is how did you write these down? So you take do you journal daily? Is that part of your process?
Every night before I go to bed, I journal.
And do you just whatever you were feeling from the day, kind of reflections? Is that how you do it?
Yep. Well, I read about what happened during the day, and then on my better nights, I journal about how I feel about what happened during the day.
Yeah, excellent. And the reason I ask you is just to help, maybe give some of our listeners some ideas on how they can journal and begin putting their thoughts on paper to help them get a better perspective as well.
I mean, I think it starts with just telling what happened during the day. I mean, you don't have to get deeper than that. You can say, I went to the store today. I had a hard day at work today. And then as you get more comfortable journaling, I think that's when you start getting more reflective on, I went to the store today. It made me feel good to be out in the public and amongst people. And so you start getting reflective on events that occurred during the day.
That's excellent. And, that helps me as a person who doesn't journal yet to know where to start. And like you said, just writing it down is the way to go. And, I definitely respect that. And I just wanted to thank you for that, because I'm not a journaler, but I know that there's so much benefit from it.
One of the things, so I have a journaling app on my iPad that I use to journal.
Yeah.
One of the great features is it shows me the same day in previous years what was going on. So I've been doing it now. I've been using the app for this is my 7th year, so I can see 6 years ago what I was doing on this day.
That's so cool.
It is really cool to see how far I've come since 6 years.
Yeah. So instead of you having to go find that journal, if you were actually writing in a book, right? If it was 6 years ago, I'm sure it's in a box somewhere.
Right.
Yep. So you're like, wait, what was I doing technology is kind of amazing on what we can do with it. Funny thing, just technology is, I always say it's the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
I like that. I absolutely like that.
We, and I work in IT, that's why I say it jokingly, but yeah, it is neat what the technology can do. And that's a great thing for the listeners too. I think myself, right, I went to traditional journaling, like, getting a notepad with lined paper and writing it down. But then you bring it up, hey, there's an app and you could take it with you wherever you're going, right? Because if it's on the iPad and if you have an iPhone, I'm sure you can probably, have it cross function between those devices. But that's a great tool. Thanks for that, David.
Yes. But one word of caution for me personally, my writing is different from if I write it down pen on paper, tends to be different than if I write on my iPad.
Really?
Because writing on a computer, you can just get everything down, and then if you don't like it, you can cut and paste and
That's
delete.
true.
On paper, once it's on paper, I mean, you can cross it off, I suppose, or use an eraser, but I don't tend to do that. I tend to think more about what I'm going to write and then write it down on paper.
Yeah, that's excellent. But yeah, thank you for sharing that experience with us, and, how writing really connected you, and helped you get a little bit better in your own journey. Right.
I mean, for me personally, one of the things, and this is probably making me unusual again from most people, but I think writing really is the thing that connects my thoughts and my feelings. It's like I don't really know what to feel about a thought until I write it down. I don't know what I'm feeling until I think about it and then write it down. So it really is the connecting tissue between feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, that's nice, because it could be the same thing for any of our listeners. Try it out, give it a try, write your thoughts down for the day, just something like David said, and see if you can get that connection as well. But that's a great advice. And not only that, you get to document your life,
Yes.
so it's fun to kind of go back and see where you were.
And it definitely helped in writing a memoir. I mean, going
I
back.
can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So now writing helped you, but I also want to ask you about cats.
Yes. So growing up, my sisters were allergic to both dogs and cats, so we couldn't have any pets. And I always wanted one. I mean, my neighbors had a nice dog, a boxer named Blitz that I was very fond of. And so when I went off to college and moved out of my parents' house, I knew right away that I wanted to get a cat. Dogs took too much work. Cats are far less maintenance.
This is true.
And so I adopted a cat named Max, and Max and I had a good 12 years together.
Nice.
And quite frankly, he helped me a lot with my depression. I mean, just knowing that I had to take care of another being took some of the focus off of myself. I wasn't so self-involved. I knew I had to take care of Max. And during time when I found out my mom was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer and she had 6 months to live, I got off the phone with my parents, and Max right away knew something was off. And he came and sat on my lap for the rest of the afternoon. It's just remarkable how the cats can read me.
Yeah.
And so over my life, I had Max, and then I had 3 others. The last 2 passed away in 2022, and now I currently have 3 more cats. And all of them have unique personalities. All of them have taught me a lot about life. I love cats. I mean, I just love watching them play. Even watching them nap can be really, really soothing.
Yeah, that's excellent, because I'm the same way, but about dogs. I grew up with dogs, and at some point my wife and I had 4 dogs, which, let me tell you something, 4 cats, you could say, oh, hey, that's a lot of cats, but they're very self-sufficient, right? Dogs are not. And when you have 4 of them and it's only you and your wife, you're definitely outnumbered. But
it's a lot of work.
Yes. But I have to tell you, the same experience is like the dogs, they know when something's wrong. And, I read before that when you pet a dog or, love on a dog or any animal, really, it releases endorphins in your brain and actually makes you a little happier. And so that's great. It's a great connection, because I do think pets can help us alleviate some of that stress and depression that we have, especially if we're living on our own.
I will say that I mentioned I wrote a section of the memoir about all the cats I've lived with. I deliberately put the cat section after the section about depression, because the section on depression is obviously really heavy.
Yeah.
And I thought writing about cats would be much more lighthearted.
A little uplifting.
Uplifting, yeah, good word. But I'll admit, when I reread my memoir, the section that makes me cry is the section about cats, because I read about their entire lives from when I got them, our lives together. But then, of course, having to let them go.
Which is always the toughest part. Oh, my goodness.
It's incredibly painful. Yes.
Yep.
And so reliving that through, I wrote about 4 of my cats. For me personally, is very hard to read.
Yeah, and that's the same for me for the dogs that we've had to let go. Just thinking about them, it gets you choked up a little bit, thinking about the good life that you had with them, though.
Right.
And just the experiences that, I probably you're the same, David, but just even looking back, even though it makes me sad, I still love all the great experiences that I've had with all the animals that have been a part of my life.
Yes, it's been a huge part of my life, and I'm very appreciative.
Yep. Excellent. Well, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about the American experience in the election season. From your perspective, how the intense political climate really added to your personal and collective stress.
Well, like I mentioned, we've talked a little bit about elections in general are stressful because you can't make mistakes. A mistake can end up in a lawsuit, or it can end up in being front page news.
You definitely don't want that kind of advertisement.
25 years of that was stressful enough. But then, as we mentioned before, having people attack the integrity of myself and my colleagues, it was overwhelmingly stressful. And especially in 2020, when we were working remote, and I couldn't pop into my colleague's office and say, boy, you just got off the call with a horrible voter.
Yeah.
Horribly angry voter. And just being able to vent myself, it wasn't there anymore. And I worry about elections since 2020, because even the other day I saw somebody on the left post something about questioning the integrity of the 2024 election.
Yes.
don't want us getting into a place where if you lose an election,
You're going to question it. Yep.
Was wrong with the election. We have to get out of that space somehow.
Absolutely. But it seems like even since, 2016, we've had these election deniers, and maybe even before that. But I really remember 2016, oh, no, he didn't win the vote. Then 2020 was even worse. It definitely escalated in that 4 years.
I had an employee that her first job was working for me in 2020. So she was very young and right out of school. And then the 2022 midterm elections came, and she said, David, is growing up meaning every year is worse than the last one? Yeah, I couldn't say no, Julia. It seems that way right now. Absolutely good, great observation.
Yeah. And that's from your experience, though, over 25 years, David. Did you notice a gradual shift in the election, just the thoughts on elections in general since you started?
I don't think it was gradual. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Starting in 2016, people really began to question the integrity of elections. And then it got exponentially worse in 2020. And it just continues to grow. And I think the atmosphere we're in, where it's so easy to post misinformation and disinformation about anything, elections was a victim to that. So part of my message here today, but also in my memoirs, we can trust our elections. Coming from the inside, I know very good people are people administering election. On election day in Minnesota, we deploy 4,000 people to work in our polling places. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our colleagues. They're people that we trust day to day. These are the people that run our elections. And we have to get back to, it's not a monolith. It's people that we know are running our elections.
It truly is. And I can say that from a voter's perspective. When I go to the polls every election, I'm looking forward to seeing the same poll workers there that I've seen for the last, 10 years. Now, I know some of them are getting a little older, so there might come that time, but you're absolutely right. They are our neighbors. I mean, one of the people in my poll place she has been there for years, and I grew up with her daughter, so I knew her, and, it's a familiar face. It is. And these are our neighbors. These are people that are there that are really trying to give us a free and fair election.
And one of the things throughout my career in elections I did, if somebody was skeptical about the way we run elections, I told them, sign up to be a poll worker.
Yeah.
Sign up to see everything that goes in place in running an election. And those people, some of them became some of our best poll workers. I mean, they absolutely came in as skeptics and then left as our biggest
advocates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from election standpoints, from your standpoint, over a 25-year career, did you see over that anything that would really truthfully lead anybody to think that our elections weren't secure?
No, the answer is no. One of the changes I should mention that when I became state election director, I never thought part of my responsibility would be fighting off the Russians.
Right.
It just seemed like completely fictional, movie crazy, but as the election director, I would get briefings from Homeland Security and the FBI on all. And it was primarily focused on cybersecurity, making sure our election systems were safe from any cyber attacks. So the focus since 2018, I think, really became cybersecurity, whereas that was brand new to me. I mean, that was not even in my thinking when I started elections in 1996.
Yeah. And now in Minnesota, did you use paper ballots, or was it a machine or a combination?
It's a combination. So every voter casts a paper ballot, but the paper ballot gets tabulated by a voting machine.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it in Ohio, too. We fill out the paper ballot and then feed it through a machine and, put the little tab in the bucket. And yeah, but I'm sure it's probably similar to Minnesota.
Well, yeah. I think most states at this point vote on paper ballots. One of the things that happened in Minnesota, so in 2008, we had a statewide U.S. Senate recount between Al Franken and Norm Coleman, where we had a hand count. So in Minnesota, when we recount ballots, we hand count them. So every ballot is looked at individually by eye. And I think we had 3.3 million ballots cast in that race. So we had to look at 3.3 million ballots, but the takeaway for me was how incredibly accurate our voting machines are.
Well, good. Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely. I mean, we do post-election audits after every big general election where we randomly hand count, selected precincts to verify that the machine actually did count them correctly. But to actually look at 3.3 million ballots and see how accurate our voting equipment was really a great lesson to learn.
Yeah, and that's something as a voter I'm glad to hear,
Yes.
because you always wonder that. And, having you, David, as an insider, like you said, giving a memoir about not only the actions of what people are, what you went through as an individual, but also showing that, yes, there is honesty. And you guys are all there to do the job to make sure that these votes are counted correctly and accurately. That's one of the things that I want to get a point apart to the audience, because I do think, like you said, a lot of people think that there's a lot of election interference, but I don't think they realize, and you shared a lot just in this little bit amount of time that we've been in, how much you guys go through to actually make sure that our elections are fair and safe.
Right. One of the things I really enjoyed at the end of my career, being the director of elections, was mentoring the next generation of election officials. It was really, really heartening to see young people be interested in getting into this profession.
Yeah.
And the people that get into this profession really love the job. They really think their job is important, which it is, but they really have a passion for doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time, and making sure our elections are run fairly and securely. That was really the part of my job that I really loved as I retired.
And, one more question I just want to ask, just opinion-wise from you. And I'll leave this caveat. These are just opinions from both of us. But, currently there's a lot of talk about making, the national or the general election like a national day off, right? Like a government holiday, so to speak, so that people can actually go to the polls, and then making it so they only vote in person. As an election official, would that have made your job easier, harder, or do you have any opinions on that? Any thoughts?
I mean, as an election official, having everybody vote on the same day would have made my job easier.
Exactly.
But personally, I'd be against that. I think that would actually tap down participation, because some people can't take that day off.
Yeah.
They're working. So to give people options on different ways to cast a valid ballot, I think is a very important part of our election processes. But to your point, maybe looking at a national holiday, but even that, then you're creating daycare issues.
Exactly. And is it a national holiday like a bank holiday where only the banks get it off, in the federal government? Or is it a holiday where, everybody gets it off, like the 4th of July, So, yeah.
I mean, I think we should continue the discussions on improving our elections.
Absolutely.
And if it is creating a national day off, let that be part of the discussion. But let's not break a good thing either.
Exactly.
And taking away people's ability to vote early, I think, would be a mistake.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. And there's a lot of people out there that can't physically get to the polls too,
Right.
I mean, so you got to have that option there to take care of those folks. Or even, one of the things that always comes into my mind is we have a national election day. That's the only day you can vote. What happens if you get sick or in a bad accident and now you can't vote, and it's your vote doesn't count? And a lot of people don't realize this, but that one vote could make a difference. We've seen it,
right?
I
mean, unfortunately, there have been times in my career where somebody gets called out of town on the Monday before the election, and they haven't voted early. They're out of luck. I mean, there's nothing we can do for that person, and that happens. I mean, life occurs. I mean, life doesn't stop for an election.
It's always been so I'm the type of person that I take all of our elections very seriously. I think as a citizen of the United States, it is my duty to cast my vote. So many people died for that right that I feel like I would be doing a disservice to not vote. So I vote in every election, but I take it a step further and say, I always go in person. And I'm hoping that doesn't bite me in the rear end one year, But no, I always believe, like I said, because I love seeing the poll workers that come out and put in so much hard time. And I just feel like it's the least I could do to take, half hour to an hour out of my day, a couple of times a year to just go and vote. But I definitely see the value in having some other options for people that can't necessarily make it. Of course, I'd love to have another holiday as well, But yeah, I just kind of, because that's been floating around a lot. And I wanted to hear, from an actual person who's done the job, what your thoughts were. So I love that. Thank you.
I should mention one of the things I'm looking forward to being a retired election official is I'm planning on voting in person now, whereas throughout my career that was really difficult to do.
I can't even imagine. Yeah,
I have to work on election day. I mean, I can't take that day off. But I am looking forward to what you just mentioned, the experience of seeing my
Seen it from the other
neighbors
side,
working
right?
multiplayer. Yeah, it'll
You're
be
like, wait,
great. I'm looking
this
forward
is
to that.
what our voters see all the time. So, David, did you just recently retire?
At the end of 2024, I
Oh,
retired.
okay, so you're like brand new, just getting into it.
Yes.
Don't know what to do with yourself quite yet, right?
A lot of time with my cats at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So, in your memoir, you did a lot of honesty. You really put yourself out there, which is what I think a lot of people expect in memoirs. But why honesty? Why do you think honesty in a memoir really resonates with readers, and especially in times of widespread uncertainty?
I think people that read memoirs read it because we want to relate to the writer. And if the writer is not being authentic or is just puffing out their chest, this is what I accomplished in my life, that's not going to resonate with anybody. I think being vulnerable and being human, that's what people that read memoirs want. And the best memoirs I've all contain that element that the author really was honest about whatever they were writing about.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because for all the memoirs that I have read, for all the memoirs I have read, you always want that part of connection as well, right? Like, oh, look at this. Here's someone that, and I think a lot of us, David, would think you held a very high office, especially, in the state of Minnesota, being the, overseeing the elections. But, we look to folks like you to hear that, oh, hey, guess what? David's normal, just like I am. And we look for that. Yeah. We look for that connection. We really do, because then we say, look, he's done all these things and had struggles similar to me, which really then inspires me to know that I can make a difference, or I can overcome these things.
I'm really hoping that that's something that resonates about my memoir, because we've talked a lot about my career in elections, but it was an accidental career. I didn't start off graduating college thinking I'm going to be an elected. I started working for government, and I gravitated towards elections because it was something that really interested me. But I started at the very bottom. My first elections-related job was sorting voter registration applications into this big bin, because at the state we have 87 counties in Minnesota. So the bin would have 87 spaces. I'd sort the voter registration forms into those spaces and then mail them out to the counties. So it was a very clerical job.
Yeah.
It's starting at that and then being able to do what I did to get to the very top of my profession. That's really kind of why I wrote the memoir. I wanted to show people that,
exactly. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you on this show, David, because it shows our normal, again, I say normal in quotations because nobody knows what normal is, but our everyday folks, right? It gives hope that the American dream is still out there. I know lately a lot of people have said, oh, the American dream's not there anymore, or it's going to be a struggle, but you can still do it. You can work your way up from the bottom all the way to the top, essentially.
Yes. Just in writing a memoir, for me, again, growing up, one of my goals in life was to write a book, but I never thought I'd actually do it. And now to see it on a bookshelf in a bookstore, it's cool, man. It's really cool.
It's so amazing, because I bet you when you started out of college, you never would have thought you would have written a book, did you?
Right. No, absolutely not.
And it's so amazing how we, as human beings, how we just evolve ourselves through, constantly striving to do just a little bit better and just a little bit better and moved up just a little bit more. And I definitely think that resonates with your story here, David. And I definitely know that it's going to resonate with our audience for sure.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear.
Yeah. And then, so, memoir obviously is going towards truth, but in your opinion, what does it mean to live authentically amidst all these external pressures?
For me, I guess living authentically means, and I hate to repeat myself, but it means being able to be vulnerable around people. If I'm having a hard day, don't try to hide it by saying I'm doing okay. Say I'm struggling today. To me, that's being authentic. Or if I'm having a really good day, let people know, hey, I got this done today. Not to gloat about it, but just to let people know that that's part of being human, is having ups and downs.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, us as men, and, speaking directly to our men here, and I don't know about how you grew up, David, but I know when I grew up, men, we weren't supposed to show emotion. We're not supposed to talk about our feelings. We're not supposed to do that's how I grew up. And I think, like yourself, I know you probably came from a similar generation, of we don't show emotion. And now to have someone like yourself who was rooted even deeper in that probably than I was, just because we have a little bit of an age difference. But, it's hard to break out of that shell, isn't it?
Yes. And for me, on top of that, culturally, Japanese are known to be very closed-in people, that you're not supposed to share your emotions in public. And so both being a male and being, I guess, similar in age, although I'm older than
just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That wasn't the way I grew up. Being emotional around other people wasn't something I was supposed to be.
Exactly. And I think that's one of those things that I think we have to break that stigma, us being a little bit of an older generation to finally say, no, it is okay for us to show emotion. It's okay for us to talk about our feelings. It's okay for us to, just like you said, the little things, say, hey, I had a great day today. I finished this. Or, hey, you know what, guys, I'm not having the best day today.
I think it's more going back to what we talked about before in this political divide where we're all at each other's throats politically.
Yeah.
I think seeing the other person as an authentic human being is more important now than ever.
My goodness, so important. So just like our conversation that we're having here, we never met before other than, a couple of emails back and forth, but just having a good, deep conversation with individuals. This is how we start the healing,
I agree.
And I'm
Absolutely.
not saying you and I are on opposite spectrums by any means, but just having these open conversations, talking about how we feel, talking about how we relate to each other, and just showing that we are so much more similar than we are different.
Let's make it the norm.
Yeah.
That everybody feels that way.
Exactly.
We actually do that. Yes.
Yep. Exactly. And then, so David, what advice would you give for those that kind of feel lost or pressured by the societal norms?
I think the advice I would give is find something that you're passionate about, and that will give your life meaning. For me, it was elections. I was very passionate about my job. For other people, it might not be their jobs. It might be taking care of an animal is your passion. But just find something that you're really passionate about and devote your energy and your life to that passion.
Yep, I love that, because if you don't, it's almost like you'll kind of start sitting back and say, okay, what's my purpose? Right? And you almost, I mean, I hate to say it, but if you're going to sit back and wait for the purpose to come to you, it's never going to. You got to really have to kind of make yourself, like you said, vulnerable and get out there and find out what your purpose is if you don't know exactly what it is.
That absolutely, you're not going to find it unless you devote the energy to finding it.
For our listeners, and because you wrote your memoir and you put down essentially your life on paper without holding anything back. So what do you, out of your hope for our readers and for the readers of the book and the listeners, what is your hope how they can apply your book to help them in their own lives? Do you have a vision for yourself? Or
I think what we just covered it is the vision that anybody that reads a memoir, I hope, gets inspired to look for their passion. A lot of what I wrote about in the memoir is what I was passionate about, not only my career, my cats, just my life in general. But hopefully it sparks that in other people. You might not relate to my love of cats, but maybe you can relate to how much I love something else.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's the vision of my book, is really to inspire people to find their own story to tell.
Yeah, and that's so excellent. And I just love the fact that you made yourself so vulnerable, but you put yourself out there. And I thank you for coming on our show and sharing the election experience and really kind of fostering me to really know that, okay, it's not as unsafe as people would want us to think, think that the elections are, which is fantastic. And like I said, I'm sure some states, maybe they're not the same, but it sounds like at least Minnesota and Ohio are on the same page.
Yeah, we are. It's been a pleasure, Nathan. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Before we go, David, the name of your book is This Is Not Who We Are. And where can our listeners go to buy your book?
You can buy it online on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can order it through any bookstore, so your local bookstore would be able to order a copy. You can go to davidmaeda.com. I have links to where the book is available, and I have different information about myself as an author. But the easiest thing, if you want to buy it online, is Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Excellent.
And just so our listeners know, David's information will be on our website as well, justadudepodcast.com. He's going to have a guest page there where we'll have all his links and his photo. So you could go there as well, and it'll get you right to David's information and to buy the book. So excellent. David, is there anything else you'd like to let the listeners know before we call it wraps for the day?
I don't think so. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit today, Nathan. think you and I have a lot of similarities as your background as a police officer. And my
Absolutely.
background.
We know the struggles, right? We know what it's like when everybody's against you,
Yes.
or at least it feels like it.
Yes.
So, but no, David, I appreciate you coming on, just learning about you, your background, and your book has been amazing. And, I guess I should ask this too before we go. Any plans for any future writing?
So after I finished writing this one, which we mentioned took me 12 years to do, I didn't think I had anything left in the well. But there have been a lot of things that have gone on. Originally, I intended to publish the book at the beginning of 2024, and it got pushed back to the end of 2024. And there's stories behind why that happened that we don't have time to get into today. But there have been some remarkable things that happened during this process that I now want to write about. So there might be a volume.
Excellent. Well, David, if that happens, reach out to me. Let me know, because I'd definitely love to have you back on to talk about any new projects that you have.
I would love to.
So excellent. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today again. I just want to thank you for sharing your insights, really being vulnerable, helping people understand that they're not alone, that we can all do this together. And, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, there you have it, folks. That wraps up another heartfelt episode of Just a Dude podcast. I want to give a big thank you to David Maeda for sharing his journey and insights with us today. If you're inspired by stories of personal growth and finding truth amidst chaos, definitely check out his book, This Is Not Who We Are. Remember, you're not alone in your struggles or your search for meaning. Keep reaching out, keep connecting, and keep being you, just a dude or a dudette, trying to navigate this crazy world. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode if it spoke to you. And if you've got thoughts or stories of your own, I'd love to hear them. Hit us up on social media or send us an email. We'll catch you next time on Just a Dude podcast. I'm Nathan, signing off.